So we're going to move on to Liverpool now. And obviously, Beth, before we discuss the summer transfers, we have to say it's been a really challenging summer for Liverpool, the tragic loss of Diogo Jota. I mean, how did Liverpool move on from that? Because it's affected the club in so many ways, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch, psychologically, in many ways. So how do they move on?
It's such a difficult one. And to be honest, I don't think we'll fully know how well Liverpool are able to move on until the season has started. I wasn't at the first friendly of the summer against Preston the other week. I was out in Switzerland, but sort of looking back on the footage of that, it was quite clear that a lot of the players before the match and at the end were just devastated. The fans were singing Jota's song for about 10 minutes at the end of the match, and the players were just stood, looking back at them and obviously really appreciating that support. But it's so difficult, and it's such a difficult balance to strike. There's no real sort of handbook for how to deal with something like this of this magnitude. I will say, I think the club have dealt with things in the best way that they possibly could have done. I think the way that they've handled everything in terms of the timing of things and sort of giving things a chance to breathe and obviously sort of liaising with his family, who are obviously the most important thing in all of this, the most important people, has been great to see. But obviously it's a devastating situation. And first and foremost, they've lost a great person. He's someone who was adored by not just his teammates, but the staff and people around the club and the training ground. They've lost a friend and an excellent human being, and recovering from that is really difficult. And then obviously you have the player as well, because he was probably Liverpool's most clinical finisher. Didn't have his best season last season. Again, was struggling with an injury that I think, to be honest, we didn't all really know the full scale of until a few months after the injury had actually happened. So I think that definitely affected him. But there's no doubt that he could still have had a massive part to play for Liverpool this season. So yeah, it's a really tough one. And I think the one thing I will say is that, this group of players, they're really together, they're really united. I think this will have brought them closer together, and I think they'll be even more determined to go out and win and do well for Jota and in his memory. But again, it's grief isn't a linear thing, and I suppose we'll only find out once the season starts what effect that does have on everyone at the club.
I've got to say, I think Arne Slot's handled it so well. His statement before the Preston game, where he basically said, look, everyone deals with it differently. If people want to play, they can play. If they want to train, they can train. If they don't want to play, they don't have to play. Everyone will take it differently. And I guess it's a day-to-day thing, and day-to-day, week-to-week, game-to-game. But obviously, Liverpool have to move on, and we know that they've arrived in Hong Kong on their pre-season tour. They've got a few new recruits. Florian Wirtz, obviously the club record signing, and as we speak, I think that Hugo Ekitike is pretty much done. So they've really, really blown their rivals out of the water this summer. So, I mean, how have they done that? Because Liverpool in the past under FSG have been very kind of conservative in their spending. When they brought in Van Dijk and Alisson, that was with the Philippe Coutinho money. It wasn't just money they plucked from nowhere. So what's happened? Why have they suddenly gone big and gone for broke on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Liverpool are financially in a really strong position. They haven't, unlike some of the rivals, had any sort of PSR issues to navigate over the past few years. They're in really rude health. They were obviously back in the Champions League last season, so all of the revenue that comes with that has sort of boosted the coffers a little bit. And also, they didn't spend. You mentioned sort of the money that at the top of the show that City spent back in January, and that club spent last summer as well. Liverpool only spent the 12 million on Chiesa, and as I said earlier on, that turned out to be a wise decision because they had a squad capable of going on to win the Premier League. But they obviously feel now that it's the time to sort of reshuffle and bring in some top quality players who the manager really, really likes. And yeah, so that I think the lack of spending in previous windows has certainly helped them. And I think sort of going back to the point that Rob made a little bit earlier on as well, like I think Liverpool are now in a fairly new position where they're right near the very top of the food chain. And obviously Liverpool have always been a big club and have always had a draw. But, it's always felt like that there were probably 3, 4, 5 other clubs ahead of them in the pecking order for these top players, the likes of Florian Wirtz. You can't imagine a player maybe of that caliber even 5 years ago choosing Liverpool over, say, Bayern Munich or Real Madrid or whatever. But I think now Liverpool are in a position where pretty much any player that they approach, they're in a really strong position to be able to bring them on board. And, with the Ekitike move, Newcastle, we know, were really interested. I think they got up to 70 million for him in the end. But as soon as the player knew about Liverpool's interest, he instantly wanted to go to them. And so that has really helped them. And they've got some real pulling power now, which, coupled with the sort of the shrewd business the past couple of years, has put them in a really strong position.
Beth, can I ask just on Liverpool's summer? I think from the outside, obviously you'll know better than me and Mark, but from the outside, there has been a little bit of surprise about, not that they've signed players, because obviously you mentioned there that they didn't spend an awful lot last summer, but the extent to which they've spent this summer, is there any surprise to you that they've gone so big in terms of the money they've spent, particularly because, I mentioned before, you're coming off the back of Premier League champions, that it would have been very easy for Liverpool to sit and say, well, we've actually got a lot of the pieces that we need here anyway. We only need like 1 or 2 tweaks. I just feel from the outside, particularly like speaking to people around sort of Man City and Man United, there has been a bit of surprise about just the amount of money that they've been able to spend and the quality of player that they've brought in.
Yeah, I think it's sort of out of character a little bit in terms of them spending all of this money in one go. So yeah, I have been slightly surprised by the scale of it. Although that being said, it was quite a strange situation last season, because Liverpool obviously won the league at a canter, but yet it still felt, certainly from sort of March, April time onwards, that this was a squad that still could be improved massively, which is quite rare when a team is doing so well in the league. So it did feel like there were certain puzzle pieces that could sort of be put into place, and players that could be improved upon. I think the one thing I will say is that, FSG have been criticised in the past for lack of spending, but they haven't ever really been afraid to put money on the table when they feel a game changer is available. Now, obviously, Mark's right. The Alisson and the Van Dijk signings, 2 of the most expensive signings in Liverpool's history, they were both made possible because of the sale of Felipe Coutinho. But even sort of, you go back to the Moises Caicedo saga a couple of summers ago, Liverpool were prepared to pay a British record fee for him. Obviously, ultimately, the player went elsewhere, but that money and that intent was there. So I think FSG, as much as they have had criticism at times, they've never been shy from, when they feel a game-changing player is available, that they'll put that money down. And I think, certainly with the Wirtz signing, I think that's what it is. I think there was an opportunity to move for him, and they felt like he could be a game changer, and that's why they paid that much money. I think the Ekitike one is interesting. I was surprised when that sort of became their interest became sort of formalised there. It felt like it does still feel like quite a lot of money for a player who has, only had one really good season in the Bundesliga, but, by all accounts, the club really like him, the manager really likes him, and they feel like, the way the market is now, how much the top number 9s are being priced at, it's a worthwhile investment.
You talk about game changers there, Beth, and there's one real game changer, Alexander Isak. Now, we know that Liverpool made a tentative inquiry, which, the way it all came out last week, so Liverpool's interest became known. It wasn't briefed by Liverpool. It was one of those situations where it kind of helped them for it to be out, because Newcastle then rebuffed it. But obviously Alexander Isak now knows that Liverpool are serious about wanting it. Then 3 or 4 days later, Newcastle play at Celtic in a pre-season friendly. Alexander Isak doesn't play. Eddie Howe, the manager, says that it's because there's so much speculation around it, but I'm confident he'll stay. But it didn't sound very confident to me. And if you can't play in a pre-season friendly where there's no pressure whatsoever, it's just a complete kind of free hit, I just thought that was a little bit weird, and a little bit, there's 6 weeks to go in the window. Isak has said nothing. He can't turn Liverpool down. And we were just talking off air that, once Nunes goes, once Chiesa goes, once Luis Diaz goes, probably to Bayern Munich, there's about 120, 130 million pounds that Liverpool could spend there. So is Alexander Isak going to be a Liverpool player by the end of the window?
I'm not making any promises whatsoever, but it's a very interesting situation. I, like you, found a lot of Eddie Howe's comments at the weekend slightly odd. And I think it would have made more of a statement from Newcastle to have Isak playing and in the squad. I understand the idea of it's maybe taking him out of the firing line a little bit, but the there's more. I think it would have been more impactful for them to have been like, he's here, he's our player, and having him out there. So yeah, and I did think sort of Eddie Howe, a lot of the language that he used was, we're hopeful that he'll still be here. We believe that he'll still be here. It wasn't an unequivocal, we're 100%, he's not going anywhere, which I did think was interesting. It's also been interesting that, despite moving for Ekitike, there hasn't been sort of a real firm, unequivocal from Liverpool, we've ended our interest in Alexander Isak. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't ended the interest, but I think he's the sort of player that, any club in the world would want him. And if, and it's a big if, there was a chance that he could still move this summer, then I'm sure Liverpool will be among those clubs who are interested. Whether financially they could make it work having signed Ekitike, I don't know. But it is certainly an interesting one to keep an eye on, because I do think sort of some of the noises coming out of Newcastle the past few days have been slightly strange.
Rob, you've covered loads of transfers, big transfers involving big clubs, and there's a certain things go on, don't they, behind the scenes that often don't get reported. And how do you read this Isak situation? Because obviously what happened last week was a bit strange in the way that it came out, and then the way he missed the game. Am I just being a little bit too cynical? Am I looking at things that aren't there, or do you think there's definitely something to you can smell a rat, is the phrase I think we say?
I agree. I agree with Beth. I just don't think that it's been handled particularly well by Newcastle. Because obviously from the outside, it's looked like Newcastle have been quite firm all the way, for the best part of a year probably, particularly with all the Arsenal interest, in saying, we're not selling him. He would cost £150 million anyway. No one's got that kind of money. Move on to a different target. I just think the way that Newcastle have handled that raises more questions than answers. And then you start thinking, well, and like you said there, it's a free hit in pre-season. Nobody cares really about these games. If he's not in the right mental place to play a pre-season game at Celtic, then that probably tells you quite a lot about where he views his own future. And how do you move on from this now? Because Newcastle, every time Eddie Howe gets in front of a camera or a journalist, all the questions are going to be about Isak. All the players in mixed zones are going to be asked about Isak. Have you spoken to him? What's he thinking? Where's he going to go? Is he going to be a Newcastle player next year? It's going to start overshadowing a lot of their pre-season. And then you get to the start of the Premier League. And is Isak going to be ready to start those games for Newcastle? If he can't play against Celtic in a pre-season game, then presumably this interest or the speculation isn't really going to go away. So is he going to be ready to play in their first game? Can he not play now until the end of the transfer window? I just thought it was a really, really odd way to handle it, because my reading of it from the outside was that, yes, there's a lot of interest in him. Obviously, Arsenal would love to have him. United would love to have him. Liverpool would probably love to have him. But no one could really afford him, so everyone just kind of move on. Well, the way that Eddie Howe has addressed it kind of suggests that there is an awful lot more to this now, and all eyes are going to be on it. I think he's blown up a story that possibly he didn't need to. I mean, look, we'd loathe to kind of give Eddie Howe advice on how to manage his squad and how to manage his play. It's obviously done what he felt was right at the time. I just think you'll know, Mark, as well. These transfer stories thrive on oxygen, don't they?
Yeah.
The more kind of oxygen you give them, the bigger they get, and it kind of gets out of hand. And I just think the way that Eddie Howe's handled that has given it loads more oxygen now, and a load more legs. And we're talking about it on a podcast that with Liverpool having signed Ekitike, you would assume that kind of interest has gone away now. But with the way that Newcastle have handled it, it doesn't feel like it has gone away.
Now, my sense in this is that the Liverpool interest last week, it was a kind of a strategic leak or brief, or you want to call it, and that it was almost like a signal to Isak that if you want to push for this, if you want to do what you do with it, we're here waiting for it. Because that's what happens, We saw with Gyökeres at Sporting Lisbon, he didn't turn up for training. He decided to push for the move. Now, Isak hasn't done that with Newcastle yet, but there's so many ways that a player can force a move. And if he wants to go to Liverpool, as we know, Newcastle haven't spent a lot of money this year. They've only brought one player in. Listen, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, but that is my view. I think there's definitely one to watch in this one.